It is a pleasure to have you with us at the English Story Journal. Today, we are practicing your English pronunciation. Listen closely to the narrator, and when you see your turn, read the sentence out loud during the pause. Let's begin.
Mrs. Rachel Lynde lived just where the Avonlea main road went down into a little hollow. A quiet brook ran through it. Mrs. Rachel sat at her window, watching everything. If she noticed anything strange, she would not rest until she found out why. She was good at managing her own home and also knew everything about others. She led the sewing circle and helped with Sunday school. Mrs. Rachel found plenty of time to sit for hours at her kitchen window, knitting and keeping a sharp eye on the main road. Anyone going in or out of Avonlea had to pass that road and be seen by Mrs. Rachel. She was sitting there one afternoon in early June. The sun was warm and bright. Matthew Cuthbert should have been planting turnip seeds at Green Gables. Mrs. Rachel knew he should. But here was Matthew Cuthbert driving slowly over the hollow and up the hill. He wore a white collar and his best suit. He had his buggy and his brown horse, which meant he was going a long distance. Where was Matthew Cuthbert going, and why? Matthew rarely left home. So it had to be something important and unusual. He was a very shy man and hated to go among strangers or to places where he might have to talk. Matthew, dressed up and driving a buggy, was something that didn't happen often. Mrs. Rachel couldn't understand it, and her afternoon was spoiled. I'll just step over to Green Gables after tea and find out from Marilla where he's gone and why, the worthy woman finally concluded. He doesn't generally go to town this time of year, and he never visits. If he'd run out of turnip seed, he wouldn't dress up and take the buggy to go for more. He wasn't driving fast enough to be going for a doctor. Yet something must have happened since last night to start him off today. I'm clean puzzled, that's what, and I won't know a minute's peace of mind or conscience until I know what has taken Matthew Cuthbert out of Avonlea today. After tea, Mrs. Rachel left. She didn't have far to go. The house where the Cuthberts lived was a short distance up the road. The long path made it seem further. The Cuthberts lived far away from other houses. It's just staying, that's what, she said as she walked along the path. It's no wonder Matthew and Marilla are both a little odd, living away back here by themselves. Trees aren't much company. I'd rather look at people. Mrs. Rachel stepped into the backyard of Green Gables. The yard was very green and neat. Mrs. Rachel knocked on the kitchen door and went in when Marilla said to. The kitchen at Green Gables was painfully clean, like a room no one used. The table behind Marilla was set for supper. Mrs. Rachel quickly noticed everything on the table. There were 3 plates, so Marilla must be expecting someone home with Matthew. But the dishes were everyday dishes, and there was only simple food. So the guest could not be special. Yet what about Matthew's white collar and the brown horse? Mrs. Rachel was getting confused by this mystery at quiet Green Gables. Good evening, Rachel, Marilla said briskly. This is a real fine evening, isn't it? Won't you sit down? How are all your folks? Marilla was a tall, thin woman. Her dark hair was always tied in a tight bun. She looked like a strict woman, which she was. We're all pretty well, said Mrs. Rachel. I was kind of afraid you weren't, though, when I saw Matthew starting off today. I thought maybe he was going to the doctor's. Marilla knew Mrs. Rachel was curious. Oh, no, I'm quite well, although I had a bad headache yesterday, she said. Matthew went to Bright River. We're getting a little boy from an orphan asylum in Nova Scotia, and he's coming on the train tonight. Mrs. Rachel was very surprised. She couldn't speak for 5 seconds. She thought Marilla might be joking. "Are you in earnest, Marilla?" she demanded when voice returned to her. "Yes, of course," said Marilla, as if getting boys from orphan asylums in Nova Scotia were part of the usual spring work on any well-regulated Avonlea farm. Instead of being an unheard-of innovation. Mrs. Rachel felt a big shock. A boy! Matthew and Marilla adopting a boy? From an orphanage? The world was certainly turning upside down. Nothing would surprise her after this. Nothing. "What on earth put such a notion into your head?" she demanded disapprovingly. "Well, we've been thinking about it for some time, all winter, in fact," returned Marilla. Mrs. Alexander Spencer was up here one day before Christmas, and she said she was going to get a little girl from the asylum over in Hopeton in the spring. Her cousin lives there, and Mrs. Spencer has visited her and knows all about it. So Matthew and I have talked it over off and on ever since. We thought we'd get a boy. Matthew's getting up in years, you know. He's 60, and he isn't so spry as he once was. His heart troubles him a good deal. And you know how desperate hard it's got to be to get hired help. There's never anybody to be had but those stupid, half-grown little French boys, and as soon as you do get one broke into your ways and taught something, he's up and off to the lobster canneries or the States. At first, Matthew suggested getting a homeboy. But I said no flat to that. They may be all right, I'm not saying they're not, but no London street Arabs for me, I said. Give me a native born at least. There'll be a risk no matter who we get. But I'll feel easier in my mind and sleep sounder at nights if we get a born Canadian. So, in the end, we decided to ask Mrs. Alexander Spencer to pick us out one when she went over to get her little girl. We heard last week she was going, so we sent her word by Richard Spencer's folks at Carmody to bring us a smart, likely boy of about 10 or 11. We decided that would be the best age, old enough to be of some use in doing chores right off, and young enough to be trained up proper. We mean to give him a good home and schooling. We had a telegram from Mrs. Alexander Spencer today. The mailman brought it from the station, saying they were coming on the 5:30 train tonight. So Matthew went to Bright River to meet him. Mrs. Spencer will drop him off there. Of course, she goes on to White Sands Station herself. Mrs. Rachel was proud she always said what she thought. She spoke her mind now after thinking about this surprising news. Well, Marilla, I'll just tell you plain that I think you're doing a mighty foolish thing, a risky thing, that's what. You don't know what you're getting. You're bringing a strange child into your house and home, and you don't know a single thing about him, nor what his disposition is like, nor what sort of parents he had, nor how he's likely to turn out. Why, it was only last week I read in the paper how a man and his wife up west of the island took a boy out of an orphan asylum and he set fire to the house at night, set it on purpose, Marilla, and nearly burnt them to a crisp in their beds. And I know another case where an adopted boy used to suck the eggs. They couldn't break him of it. If you had asked my advice in the matter, which you didn't do, Marilla, I'd have said for mercy's sake not to think of such a thing. That's what. Rachel's words did not seem to bother Marilla. She kept knitting. I don't deny there's something in what you say, Rachel. I've had some qualms myself, but Matthew was terrible set on it. I could see that, so I gave in. It's so seldom Matthew sets his mind on anything that when he does, I always feel it's my duty to give in. And as for the risk, there's risks in pretty near everything a body does in this world. There's risks in people's having children of their own if it comes to that. They don't always turn out well. And then Nova Scotia is right close to the island. It isn't as if we were getting him from England or the States. He can't be much different from ourselves. Well, I hope it will turn out all right, said Mrs. Rachel in a tone that plainly indicated her painful doubts. Only don't say I didn't warn you if he burns Green Gables down or puts strychnine in the well. I heard of a case over in New Brunswick where an orphan asylum child did that, and the whole family died in fearful agonies. Only it was a girl in that instance. Well, we're not getting a girl, said Marilla, as if poisoning wells were a purely feminine accomplishment and not to be dreaded in the case of a boy. I'd never dream of taking a girl to bring up. I wonder at Mrs. Alexander Spencer for doing it. But there, she wouldn't shrink from adopting a whole orphan asylum if she took it into her head. Mrs. Rachel wanted to stay until Matthew came home with the boy. But she thought it would be 2 more hours. So she decided to go to Robert Bell's house to tell the news. She loved to share exciting news, so she left. Marilla felt better because Mrs. Rachel's negative talk made her own worries come back. Well, of all things that ever were or will be, ejaculated Mrs. Rachel when she was safely out in the lane. It does really seem as if I must be dreaming. Well, I'm sorry for that poor young one and no mistake. Matthew and Marilla don't know anything about children, and they'll expect him to be wiser and steadier than his own grandfather. It seems uncanny to think of a child at Green Gables somehow. There's never been one there. I wouldn't be in that orphan's shoes for anything. My, but I pity him, that's what. So said Mrs. Rachel to the wild rose bushes. But if she could have seen the child who was waiting patiently at the Bright River station at that very moment, her pity would have been still deeper.
Thank you for spending time with us. I hope this story brought you peace and reflection. We will see you soon.